The thunder came first, not from the clear blue Maine sky above Millbrook, but from the ground. A deep primal rumble that vibrated through concrete and rattled storefront windows along Main Street. The townspeople stopped in their tracks, conversations silenced mid-sentence. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Jim Carter felt it before he heard it. Standing in his shop, scissors in hand, midway through cutting a pattern for Mrs. Peterson's curtains. The vibration traveled up through the soles of his worn leather boots, a sensation he hadn't felt in 30 years, but recognized instantly. His weathered hands stilled the fabric, forgotten. The rumble grew louder, transforming into the unmistakable growl of dozens of motorcycle engines working in unison. A symphony of American steel and precision engineering approaching from the east side of town. Jim moved to the window, parting the lace curtains with fingers that suddenly ached with arthritis he usually ignored. The sight confirmed what his bones already knew. Motorcycles, not just any motorcycles. Harley-Davidsons. 50-plus riders in formation, two abreast, moving with military precision down Main Street toward his shop. The afternoon sun glinted off their chrome pipes and black leather. The lead rider, a massive figure astride a classic Electra Glide, raised his gloved hand. The procession halted with mechanical precision directly in front of Jim's store. The engines idled in perfect sync, their rumbling voices speaking a language Jim had once been fluent in. The townspeople pressed back against buildings, mothers pulling children closer. Sheriff Williams emerged from the diner across the street, hand resting near his holster, but making no move to interfere. Jim Carter, 68 years old, former Marine combat veteran of Desert Storm, and for the past 25 years the unassuming owner of Carter's Tailoring, walked with deliberate steps to the back room. From the highest shelf behind bolts of fabric and sewing supplies, he retrieved a wooden box. The lock opened with a key he still wore around his neck. Inside lay a pristine M1911 pistol maintained with the same meticulous care he gave to his sewing machines. The weight of it felt familiar in his hand. He checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, tucked it into the back of his waistband, and covered it with his work vest. When Jim stepped through his shop door onto the sidewalk, the leader of the riders was waiting. A mountain of a man, silver-haired, but still imposingly broad-shouldered beneath his leather cut. His weathered face bore deep creases around ice-blue eyes, and his beard, once jet black, was now the color of storm clouds. The patch on his leather vest read, "President," beneath the logo of a skull with wings and the words, "Road Brothers MC." The street had fallen completely silent. Even the engines had been cut. The only sound was the light tap of Jim's boots as he descended the 3 wooden steps to the sidewalk. He stopped precisely 6 feet from the biker leader, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at his sides, but ready. For 10 agonizing seconds, no one moved. Then the biker leader took 1 step forward, then another. His face, previously hard as granite, slowly transformed. The corners of his mouth turned upward. His eyes softened. "Ironheart," the man said, his voice a graveled rumble. Jim's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Steel," he replied. In one fluid motion, the 2 men closed the distance between them and embraced a bear hug between equals that spoke of decades of shared history. "It's been 30 years since Operation Desert Shield, brother," the biker said, clapping Jim on the back with a hand the size of a dinner plate. 30 years too long. The tension that had gripped the street dissolved like morning fog in sunshine. Sheriff Williams visibly relaxed, though his cautious gaze remained. The townspeople began to whisper among themselves, watching this unexpected reunion unfold. Jim Carter, who had spoken more in the last 10 seconds than most locals had heard from him in a month, pulled back from the embrace. "What brings the Road Brothers to Millbrook, Mike? Last I heard, you boys were keeping to the West Coast." Mike Steele Williams, president of the Road Brothers Motorcycle Club, looked past Jim to the tailoring shop with its neat displays and spotless windows. "Something tells me you already know why we're here. Still got that old shovel head in working order." Jim's eyes narrowed slightly. "Been saving it for a rainy day." Mike nodded, understanding the layers beneath the simple response. "Well, brother, I'd say we're about to have ourselves quite a storm." Across the street, Sarah Martinez stood frozen in the doorway of her cafe, her 8-year-old son, Tommy, clutched protectively at her side. Her wide eyes met Jim's for just a moment. In that silent exchange, Jim made a decision. He turned back to Mike. "Might be best if we take this conversation inside." As the 2 men entered the tailor shop, the remaining bikers dismounted in unison. Like a well-oiled machine, they secured their motorcycles, forming a protective perimeter that extended the entire block. Each rider wore the same leather vest with the Road Brothers insignia, though their individual patches told stories of rank and accomplishment within the Brotherhood. Inside the shop, Jim flipped the sign to closed and drew the blinds. Mike's enormous frame made the tidy space seem suddenly cramped. He removed his riding gloves, revealing knuckles mapped with old scars, and ran his fingers appreciatively over a bolt of fine wool. "Nice place you've made for yourself here, Jim. Quiet, respectable." The words carried no judgment, merely observation. Jim moved to the back room and returned with 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon that had remained unopened for years. He poured 2 fingers in each glass, handed one to Mike, and raised his own slightly. "To the ones who didn't make it back," Jim said quietly. Mike nodded solemnly. "To the fallen." They drank in silence, the amber liquid burning a path to memories both shared and rather left untouched. Jim set his glasses down. "Now tell me why 50 Road Brothers just rolled into my town." Mike settled his substantial frame into a chair that protested under his weight. "Warren Davidson." Just 2 words, but they landed like physical blows. Jim's expression remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. "What about him?" Jim's voice was carefully neutral. "He's making moves, big ones. Started about 6 months ago." Mike leaned forward, the chair creaking dangerously. "First, it was buying up properties in towns like this all over New England. Then came the pressure tactics. Finally, the muscle. Black serpents." Jim said the name, tasting bitter on his tongue. Mike nodded grimly. "Davidson's bankrolling them now. They've grown from a small-time operation to over 100 members. New bikes, new weapons, new territories." Jim set his glass down with deliberate care. "This still doesn't explain why you're here, Mike. I left the club 30 years ago. I'm just a tailor now." Mike's laugh was without humor. "A tailor who still keeps a loaded M1911 within reach." His expression sobered. "Davidson's been asking questions, Jim. About you specifically. About what happened in Iraq. About what you might still have in your possession." Jim's face revealed nothing, but his eyes flicked briefly to the floorboards beneath his cutting table. "He's coming for you, Jim. And he's not coming alone." Mike drained his glass. "Neither are you. Not anymore." Outside, the Road Brothers had established their presence, their motorcycles now parked in formation along both sides of Main Street. The residents of Millbrook watched from a distance, equal parts wary and fascinated by these leather-clad visitors. Sheriff Dave Williams pushed through the cafe door, making a beeline for Sarah Martinez, who was nervously wiping down already clean tables. "Sarah," the sheriff nodded, removing his hat. At 65, Williams was nearing retirement, his hair entirely gray, and his waistline testament to too many of Sarah's homemade pies. "Sheriff," she responded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I suppose you're here about them." She nodded toward the window and the bikers beyond. "Just checking in, making sure you and Tommy are okay." Sarah glanced at her son, who was peering out the window with undisguised fascination at the motorcycles. "We're fine, just surprised. They seem to know Mr. Carter." The sheriff followed her gaze across the street to the tailor shop. "Jim Carter's got layers most folks in town never bothered to look past." He turned back to Sarah. "Any trouble recently with Davidson or his people?" Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down her cloth. "He was in yesterday. Said my rent's going up next month. Double what it is now." She swallowed hard. "I can barely make ends meet as it is." Sheriff Williams sighed heavily. "He's doing the same all over town. Bought the Peterson place last week. The hardware store the week before." "What does he want with Millbrook? We're just a small town." "Location, interstate access, developable land." The sheriff's weathered face creased with concern. "But that doesn't explain why he seems particularly interested in pushing you out, Sarah." Tommy had wandered back to their table, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, did you see those motorcycles? They're so cool." The man in front has a Harley Electra Glide Classic with custom exhaust pipes and... "Tommy," Sarah interrupted, smoothing his unruly hair. "How do you know so much about motorcycles?" "Mr. Carter told me. He has magazines in his back room. He lets me look at them when you bring me there after school." Sheriff Williams raised an eyebrow. "Jim Carter talks to you about motorcycles. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. He used to have a 1969 shovelhead with original paint. He said it was the best bike ever made. He keeps it in his garage but doesn't ride it anymore. Sarah and the sheriff exchanged surprised glances. Jim Carter had always been polite but reserved with everyone in town, speaking only when necessary and revealing little about himself. The idea of him chatting enthusiastically about motorcycles with an 8-year-old boy was unexpected. "Tommy," Sarah said gently, "why don't you go work on your homework in the back room?" Once Tommy was out of earshot, the sheriff leaned closer. "How much do you know about Jim Carter?" Sarah shrugged. "Not much. He moved here about 25 years ago, opened the tailor shop, keeps to himself. He's been kind to Tommy and me, especially since—" She trailed off. "Since Richard left," the sheriff finished for her. Sarah nodded, her jaw tightening at the mention of her ex-husband. "Jim's been giving Tommy free alterations for his clothes. Says a growing boy needs pants that fit right. He even made him a winter coat last year when I couldn't afford a new one." Sheriff Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Jim Carter's not just a tailor, Sarah. Before he came to Millbrook, he was a Marine, served with distinction in Desert Storm. But before that," he hesitated. "Before that, rumor has it he was a founding member of the Road Brothers MC, one of the original 9. The sheriff nodded toward the window. "Those men out there, they don't just show up for anyone. Whatever's happening, it's serious." Sarah felt a chill run through her, despite the warm cafe. "Should I be worried?" Before the sheriff could answer, the door to Jim's shop opened. Jim and Mike emerged, both men scanning the street with the practiced vigilance of those accustomed to assessing threats. Their eyes moved in matching patterns: doorways, roof lines, vehicles' potential cover. "Just keep Tommy close," Sheriff Williams said, settling his hat back on his head. "And maybe keep your distance from Jim Carter for a while." Sarah watched as the sheriff crossed the street to approach the two men. She couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language was clear, cautious respect on the sheriff's part, controlled tolerance from Mike and from Jim, an uncharacteristic intensity that transformed the quiet tailor into someone she barely recognized. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows down Main Street, the Road Brothers remained. Some patronized the diner and the general store, always in groups of 3 or 4, always polite but watchful. Others established a rotating perimeter around Jim's shop. The townspeople maintained a cautious distance, but as hours passed without incident, curiosity began to overcome wariness. Inside the cafe, Sarah was preparing to close for the day when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see a familiar black Cadillac Eldorado pull up outside its gleaming paint job and white wall tires immaculate as always. Warren Davidson. He entered alone, though Sarah could see 2 men waiting in the car. At 60, Davidson cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit and polished shoes. His salt and pepper hair was expertly styled, and his smile revealed teeth too perfect to be natural. His eyes, however, remained cold behind his designer glasses. "Ms. Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the refinement of old New England money, "I trust you have had time to consider our discussion." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Davidson, as I told you yesterday, I can't afford to double the rent. This cafe has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built this place." Davidson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Progress waits for no one, my dear. Millbrook is changing. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who cling to the past," he shrugged eloquently, "well, change can be difficult." Sarah felt her temper flare. "Is that why you've brought in those men to intimidate people, to make change less difficult?" Davidson followed her gaze to his waiting car. "My associates are merely security consultants. These are uncertain times." His eyes drifted across the street to where several Road Brothers stood watching his car with undisguised hostility. "Though I see Millbrook has some unexpected visitors today." And the casual way he said it couldn't quite mask his tension. Davidson's knuckles had whitened around the handle of his leather briefcase. "I'll need your decision by tomorrow," Davidson continued, turning back to Sarah. "Double the rent or vacate within 30 days. The cafe door opened again. Jim Carter stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light. Though his clothes were still those of a simple tailor, something in his stance had changed the soldier's readiness visible beneath the civilian disguise. "Ms. Martinez isn't going anywhere, Davidson." Jim's voice was quiet but carried effortlessly across the room. And your rent stays as it was. Davidson's smile tightened. Mr. Carter, I wasn't aware you had an interest in Ms. Martinez's business arrangements. I have an interest in keeping Millbrook the way it is. Jim took a step into the cafe. And in protecting its people from predators. Davidson chuckled, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Strong words from a man who hides behind a sewing machine. His eyes flicked to the window where several road brothers had positioned themselves with clear lines of sight to the cafe. Though I see you've called in reinforcements. Old habits die hard, don't they? Jim moved closer, and Sarah was struck by how differently he carried himself now compared to the quiet, stooped tailor she thought she knew. This Jim Carter moved with lethal economy, every step deliberate. Last warning, Davidson. Leave Sarah alone. Leave Millbrook alone. Davidson's facade of civility cracked slightly. You don't give orders anymore, Carter. You lost that right when Tommy died. The name landed like a physical blow. Jim's face hardened, a muscle working in his jaw. That's ancient history, Jim said, his voice dangerously soft. Is it? Davidson moved toward the door. We'll see. At the threshold, he paused. Oh, and Miss Bahia, Martinez, I'd start packing if I were you. As Davidson's Cadillac pulled away, Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, turning to Jim with questions burning on her tongue. Before she could speak, Tommy burst from the back room. Mr. Carter, Tommy exclaimed, running toward the tailor with unrestrained enthusiasm. Did you see all the motorcycles? Are they your friends? Jim's transformation was remarkable. The dangerous intensity that had radiated from him moments before vanished, replaced by the gentle demeanor Sarah recognized from their usual interactions. He knelt to Tommy's level, his movements stiff with age but purposeful. They're old friends, Tommy, from a long time ago. Do you have a motorcycle too, like you told me about? Jim nodded, a small smile softening his weathered features. I do. Haven't ridden it in a long time, though. Tommy's eyes widened. Can I see it sometime, please? Maybe, Jim said, ruffling the boy's hair as he stood. If it's okay with your mom. Sarah found her voice. Tommy, can you please finish wiping down the tables while I talk to Mr. Carter? Once Tommy was busy, Sarah stepped closer to Jim. What was that about with Davidson, and who's Tommy? He seemed to know that name would hurt you. Jim's face closed off the brief warmth he'd shown her son, disappearing behind a carefully neutral expression. It's complicated, Sarah. Those men across the street, she pressed. The Road brothers. The sheriff says you used to be one of them. Jim was quiet for so long, Sarah thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was lower. A lifetime ago. Before Desert Storm. Before I came to Millbrook. And Davidson? What does he want? Jim's gaze drifted to where Tommy was industriously cleaning tables, whistling tunelessly to himself. It's not about what he wants. It's about what he thinks I have. And do you have it, whatever it is? Jim met her eyes directly. Yes. The simple admission hung between them. Is it dangerous? Will it put Tommy in danger? Not if Davidson keeps his distance. Jim's expression softened slightly. Sarah, I've watched you struggle to keep this place going since Richard left. I've seen how hard you work to give Tommy a good life. I won't let Davidson take that from you. Why help us? Jim's eyes returned to Tommy. Because someone helped me once when I needed it most. He moved toward the door. Lock up tight tonight. Don't open for anyone you don't know. After he left, Sarah found herself staring across the street at the shop she'd passed 1,000 times without really seeing. Jim Carter, the quiet tailor who hemmed pants and made wedding dresses, who helped her son with math homework and refused payment for alterations, suddenly seemed like a stranger. As darkness fell, the Road brothers established a camp of sorts at the edge of town. Their disciplined efficiency spoke of military backgrounds, each man knowing his role without need for instruction. A rotating guard was established with pairs of riders patrolling the perimeter of Millbrook at regular intervals. In his apartment above the tailor shop, Jim Carter pulled up the loose floorboard beneath his bed. The metal box inside had remained untouched for decades. He lifted it out, feeling the weight of both the contents and the memories they carried. The knock at his door came just as he was replacing the floorboard. Jim moved silently to the door, M1911 in hand. Who is it? Steele. Jim opened the door, tucking the pistol into his waistband. Mike entered, ducking slightly under the doorframe. "Nice place," Mike said, surveying the sparse but meticulously organized apartment. "Very you." "What's the word?" Jim asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Mike settled his bulk onto a kitchen chair that complained beneath him. "Sheriff's cooperating reluctantly. Says Davidson's been buying up property for months, pushing out local businesses, bringing in his own people. And the Black Serpents, not here yet, but they will be." Mike fixed Jim with a steady gaze. "You still have it, don't you, the package?" Jim didn't answer directly. "Davidson wants more than just Millbrook. This is about what happened in Iraq, what his brother did, what I saw." Mike nodded grimly. "Tommy always said his brother was dirty. None of us realized how deep it went until that last mission." He leaned forward. "Jim, the club never blamed you for what happened to Tommy. You know that, right?" Jim turned away, moving to the window that overlooked Main Street. "I was responsible. He was my prospect, my responsibility. He was Davidson's brother. He made his own choices." Jim's silence spoke volumes. Mike sighed heavily. "Davidson's got resources now, connections. The Black Serpents are just the muscle. He's got people in state government, in law enforcement." "Not in Millbrook," Jim said. "Dave Williams is straight. One honest sheriff won't be enough, brother." Mike stood, joining Jim at the window. "The Road Brothers stand with you, all of us. But you need to make a decision about that package, about whether it's time the truth came out." Jim's reflection in the window glass looked suddenly older, the weight of 3 decades of silence etched in every line of his face. "I promised Tommy I'd keep it safe, that I'd use it if his brother ever stepped out of line. And now he has." "Yes," Jim turned from the window. "But there's something else happening here. Davidson's too smart to come after me directly just for the package. He wants Millbrook for a reason, and I need to know what that reason is before I make my move." Mike nodded, understanding the strategy. "We'll do some recon, quietly." As Mike turned to leave, Jim spoke again. "That cafe owner, Sarah Martinez, and her boy, they need protection." Mike studied his old friend. "The boy reminds you of Tommy." It wasn't a question, but Jim answered anyway. "Tommy was just a kid, too, trying to escape his brother's shadow." His jaw tightened. "I won't fail this one." After Mike left, Jim returned to the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. This time he removed not the metal box, but something wrapped in oilcloth. Carefully, he unwrapped a set of motorcycle keys attached to a worn leather fob bearing the Road Brothers insignia. Across town, in the modest apartment above her cafe, Sarah tucked Tommy into bed. His excited chatter about motorcycles and the mysterious Mr. Carter had finally given way to drowsy questions she couldn't answer. "Mom, why does Mr. Davidson want our cafe?" Sarah smoothed his blanket. "I don't know, sweetheart. But don't worry about it. Everything will be fine." "Is Mr. Carter going to help us?" "He said he would." Sarah hesitated. "Mr. Carter is very kind, but this is grown-up business. Now get some sleep." After kissing his forehead, Sarah retreated to the small living room. Through the window, she could see a pair of motorcycles parked across the street. Road Brothers standing guard. She wasn't sure whether to feel protected or terrified. The knock at her door made her jump. Cautiously, she approached. "Who is it?" "Sheriff Williams." She opened the door, relief flooding through her. The sheriff entered, removing his hat. "Sorry to bother you so late, Sarah. Just checking in." "We're fine. Tommy's asleep." She gestured to the window. "Though our new neighbors are making it hard to forget today's excitement." The sheriff glanced out at the Road Brothers. "They won't bother you. Despite their appearance, the Road Brothers have a code. They protect their own." He paused. "And apparently Jim Carter has decided that includes you and Tommy." Sarah sank onto her worn sofa. "I don't understand any of this. Jim's been coming to my cafe for years. He's quiet, polite. He helps Tommy with homework. Now suddenly he's confronting Davidson, and there are bikers everywhere, and something about someone named Tommy who died." Sheriff Williams settled his substantial frame into the armchair opposite her. "What I'm about to tell you isn't common knowledge, Sarah, but given the circumstances, you deserve to know." He leaned forward, his aged face grave in the lamplight. 30 years ago, Jim Carter wasn't just a member of the Road Brothers. He was their enforcer. The man they sent when things needed handling. They called him Ironheart because he could make the hard decisions no one else could. Sarah tried to reconcile this information with the gentle man who patiently taught Tommy how to fold pocket squares. During Desert Storm, Jim and several other road brothers served together, including Thomas Davidson, Warren Davidson's younger brother. Thomas was Jim's prospect in the club, still earning his patches. "What happened?" Sarah asked, though something told her she didn't want to know. The official report says Thomas Davidson died heroically saving his unit from an enemy ambush. The sheriff's expression suggested the official report left much untold. After the war, Jim left the Road Brothers, cut all ties, moved here, and became the man you know now. Sarah processed this information slowly. And Davidson, what does he want with Jim after all this time? The sheriff said heavily, is the million-dollar question. Whatever it is, it's big enough to bring the Road Brothers out in force. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. I've known Jim Carter for 25 years, Sarah. He's a good man who's worked hard to leave his past behind. But make no mistake, the man underneath those tailored shirts is still Ironheart of the Road Brothers, and he's still dangerous. After the sheriff left, Sarah found sleep impossible. She checked on Tommy repeatedly, irrationally afraid that the collision of past and present unfolding in Millbrook might somehow sweep him away. Around midnight, movement in the street caught her attention. A lone figure emerged from the shadows behind Jim's shop, pushing what appeared to be a motorcycle. In the dim glow of the streetlights, she recognized Jim Carter's tall form. He was dressed differently now, jeans, heavy boots, and a leather vest over a plain black t-shirt. With practiced ease that belied his age, Jim swung onto the motorcycle. The Harley shovelhead roared to life, its distinctive sounds splitting the night. Jim paused, looking up toward Sarah's window, as if he could sense her watching. Then, with a nod so slight she might have imagined it, he guided the motorcycle out of town, passing between two road brothers, who raised their hands in silent salute. Sarah remained at the window long after the sound of Jim's motorcycle had faded. Whatever storm was coming to Millbrook, she realized had been brewing for 30 years. And somehow she and Tommy had found themselves at its center. The next morning dawned with an artificial calm. The Road Brothers maintained their presence, but with deliberate discretion, allowing the townspeople to proceed with their routines. Sarah opened the cafe on time, though her night of restless sleep left her movements mechanical. Her first customers were three Road Brothers, gray-haired men with weathered faces and watchful eyes, who ordered coffee and pancakes and left generous tips. They were unfailingly polite, their manners at odds with their intimidating appearance. Just before noon, the bell above the door jingled. Sarah looked up to see two men enter who were definitely not locals. Their leather vests bore patches different from the Road Brothers, a black serpent coiled to strike. They moved with calculated swagger, taking a table in the center of the cafe and sprawling in their chairs like they owned the place. "Coffee," one barked, not bothering to look at the menu. Sarah brought them coffee, aware that the few remaining customers were hastily paying and leaving. "Anything else?" she asked, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite her racing heart. The larger of the two, a bull-necked man with a shaved head and arms covered in crude tattoos, looked her up and down with insulting deliberation. "Aren't you a pretty little thing?" Davidson said this place had good scenery. Sarah took an instinctive step back. "If you're not ordering food, I'll need the table for paying customers." The second man, wiry and sharp-featured, laughed. "Feisty, too. I like that." He reached for her wrist. "Sit down and talk with us a while, pretty lady." Before his fingers could close around her arm, the cafe door opened. Not with its usual cheerful jingle, but with a forceful thrust that sent it banging against the wall. Three Road Brothers stood in the doorway, their relaxed postures belying the lethal intent in their eyes. "Problem here, Sarah?" asked the tallest of the three, a man she'd heard the others call Doc. The black serpents tensed but remained seated. The shaved man forced a grin. "No problem at all. Just enjoying the local hospitality." Doc stepped fully into the cafe, his companions flanking him. Though in his 60s, he moved with the fluid confidence of a much younger man. "Funny. Looked to me like you were bothering the lady." The atmosphere in the small cafe had transformed, charged with potential violence held in check by the thinnest of margins. "We're just having coffee," the wiry man said, his hand drifting toward his waistband. "Free country, last I checked." "Indeed it is," Doc agreed amiably. "And the lady is free to ask you to leave her establishment," which I believe she was doing when we arrived. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then the cafe door opened again, and Tommy burst in, backpack bouncing against his small frame. Mom's school let out early because the pipes broke, and he skidded to a halt, his eyes widening as he absorbed the tension filling the room. Sarah moved toward him instinctively, but the wiry black serpent was faster. He snatched Tommy's arm, yanking the boy against him. "Cute kid, he said, his voice hard. Be ashamed if anything happened to him." Sarah froze, terror stealing her breath. The Road brothers remained motionless, their eyes calculating distances and angles. "Let him go," Doc said, his friendly demeanor evaporating. "The boy has nothing to do with this." Tommy struggled against the man's grip. "Let me go. My friend Mr. Carter will make you sorry." The shaved man laughed. "Mr. Carter." The tailor. His amusement was genuine. "Kid, your tailor friend is just a washed-up old man hiding from his past." "I wouldn't be so sure about that." The voice came from behind the black serpents. Somehow unnoticed by anyone, Jim Carter had entered through the back door of the cafe. He stood in the kitchen doorway, no longer the stooped tailor, but fully the man Sheriff Williams had described, Ironheart of the Road brothers. In his hand was the M1911, held not with the nervous grip of a civilian, but with the practiced ease of someone for whom weapons were extensions of will. "Let the boy go, now." Each word was precisely measured, devoid of emotion, yet conveying absolute certainty. The wiry man tightened his grip on Tommy. "You won't shoot with the kid so close." Jim's expression didn't change. "I served as a designated marksman in Desert Storm. At this distance, I could put a round through your eye without Tommy feeling more than the breeze of its passing." He raised the pistol to demonstrate. "But you're right. I'd prefer not to discharge a firearm so close to the boy." With a movement too fast for Sarah to follow, Jim's left hand produced a throwing knife that embedded itself in the table less than an inch from the wiry man's hand. "That was a warning," Jim said calmly. "The next one removes your trigger finger. Now for the last time, let him go." The calculation in the man's eyes was visible, the odds, the consequences, the certainty of Jim Carter's deadly promise. He released Tommy, who immediately ran to his mother. "Smart choice," Jim said. He nodded to Doc, who moved forward with his companions to flank the black serpents. "Now you're going to leave Millbrook. You're going to tell Davidson that his message has been received. And you're going to tell the rest of the black serpents that Millbrook is under the protection of the Road brothers." The shaved man stood, his massive frame tense with thwarted violence. "This isn't over, Ironheart." Jim's expression remained impassive. "No, it's just beginning." After the black serpents had been escorted out, Sarah held Tommy tightly, her body trembling with residual fear and relief. Jim approached carefully, the pistol now hidden from view. "Are you both all right?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Tommy looked up at Jim with newfound awe. "You were so cool, Mr. Carter, like a superhero. Where did you learn to throw knives like that?" Jim's weathered face softened slightly. "A long time ago, Tommy, in another life." "Is that why those men called you Ironheart? Is that your superhero name?" Jim knelt to Tommy's level, wincing slightly as his knees protested. "It's just an old nickname, buddy. Nothing special." Tommy's expression turned serious. "Are those bad men coming back? They said mean things to Mom." "They won't bother you again." Jim's voice carried absolute certainty. "I promise you that." Sarah found her voice. "Tommy, go upstairs and wait for me." After Tommy reluctantly trudged up the back stairs, Sarah turned to Jim. "You just pulled a gun in my cafe. There were knives and threats, and my son was in danger." Her voice shook with emotion. "I need to know what's happening. All of it. No more half-truths." Jim glanced at Doc and the other Road brothers, who nodded and withdrew to give them privacy. When they were alone, Jim seemed to age before her eyes, the iron hardness giving way to bone-deep weariness. "It's a long story, Sarah. I've got time." Jim nodded toward a booth in the far corner. Once they were seated, he began. 30 years ago, I was a different man. After my first tour as a Marine, I came home lost. The Road brothers found me, gave me purpose, brotherhood." His eyes took on a faraway look. "Back then, the club was mostly veterans, men who understood what it meant to come back from war changed." He traced patterns on the tabletop with weathered fingers. "Warren Davidson's younger brother Thomas wanted in. He was just a kid, really. 22, hungry for respect, desperate to escape his brother's shadow. Warren was already making a name for himself in business, but he came from old money. Never served, never struggled. Jim's jaw tightened. Thomas became my prospect, my responsibility. He was a good kid with a lot to prove. Then Desert Storm happened. Several of us got called up together, including Thomas. We made a pact to look out for each other over there. Sarah sensed the story approaching its painful heart. What happened? Our unit was assigned to secure intelligence from an Iraqi military installation. Standard mission. But something went wrong. Jim's voice dropped. We were ambushed. Too many insurgents, too well prepared. Like they knew we were coming. He fell silent, the memories visibly washing over him. Thomas saved me, pushed me out of the line of fire, took a bullet meant for me. Jim's eyes closed briefly. Before he died, he gave me a package. Said if anything happened to him, I should get it to someone who could be trusted. Said his brother was involved in something dirty. Arms dealing, selling information. Warren Davidson was betraying his country, Sarah asked incredulously. For profit, yes. Jim's expression hardened. The package contained documentation, bank transfers, communications, enough to prove Warren Davidson had sold information that led directly to our ambush, to his own brother's death. Why didn't you turn it in, report him? I tried. The bitterness in Jim's voice was palpable. Went through proper channels. Suddenly evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. I was strongly encouraged to let it go. He looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. Davidson had powerful friends even then, and money can buy a lot of cooperation. Sarah struggled to process this revelation. So you kept the evidence all these years? Wait. Insurance. As long as Davidson knew I had it, he kept his distance, left me alone to build a new life. Jim's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. I became a tailor because it was the opposite of everything I'd been. Precise, peaceful, creating instead of destroying. And now why is he coming after you after all this time? Jim leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the window. That's what I need to find out. Davidson's always been ambitious, but something's changed. He's making big moves, consolidating power. And for some reason, Millbrook is important to whatever he's planning. Sarah thought of her cafe, of the building her grandfather had built with his own hands. So this isn't just about raising my rent or buying the Peterson place. No, it's strategic, and it centers around this town. Jim refocused on her. Does your family own this building outright? Yes, it's one of the few Davidson doesn't control. My grandfather made sure the deed was ironclad. Jim nodded thoughtfully. Davidson's tried buying you out multiple times. Yes. The offers keep getting higher, but I won't sell. This place is Tommy's inheritance, and his connection to his father before Richard. She trailed off. Before he left, Jim finished for her. How long ago was that? 4 years. Tommy was just 4. Richard said small-town life was suffocating him. Last I heard, he was in California. Something in Jim's expression sharpened. Richard Martinez, your ex-husband, what did he do for work? Sarah frowned, surprised by the question. He was a geological surveyor, worked for an engineering firm that specialized in site assessments for development projects. Her eyes widened as connections formed. He did work for Davidson, right before he left. Jim leaned forward, intensity radiating from them. Sarah, did Richard ever talk about what he found during his survey of Millbrook? Anything unusual? Sarah thought back, trying to remember conversations from a painful time. He was excited about something. Said he'd made a discovery that would change everything. I thought he meant for our family, but then he just left. Did he leave anything behind? Notes, maps, survey data? Sarah shook her head, then stopped. Wait, there's a box in the attic. Things he couldn't fit in his car when he left. I never looked through it. It was too painful. Jim stood. We need to see that box, now. As they moved toward the back stairs, the cafe door burst open. Sheriff Williams stood there, his face grave. Jim, we've got trouble. Big trouble. What is it, Dave? Black serpents, at least 100 of them, just crossed the county line. And they're not alone. The sheriff removed his hat, revealing a sheen of sweat despite the cool day. Warren Davidson is with them, and he's got Tommy. The world stopped for Sarah Martinez. The words hung in the air, impossible and horrifying. Tommy, Davidson, the black serpents. Her mind refused to process them in sequence, as though rejecting the reality they described could somehow make it untrue. "What did you say?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Sheriff Williams repeated himself, each word measured in grave. "Davidson has Tommy. Black serpents grabbed him from the schoolyard during recess. Teacher tried to intervene. They knocked her unconscious. Sarah swayed her knees, threatening to buckle. Jim caught her arm, his grip firm and steadying. In his eyes, she saw not panic, but a cold, focused rage. "How long?" Jim asked. 20 minutes ago. Got the call from the school principal." Sarah found her voice again. "Where are they taking him? What does Davidson want with my son?" The questions tumbled out, each one feeding her mounting terror. Jim turned to her, his weathered face set in lines of absolute determination. "Davidson wants the package. He's using Tommy as leverage." "Then give it to him," Sarah cried, clutching Jim's arm. "Whatever it is, it's not worth my son's life." "It's not that simple," Jim said, his voice low. "Once Davidson has what he wants, there's nothing to stop him from—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sheriff Williams moved toward the door. "I've called for backup from the county, but they're 30 minutes out at best." "We don't have 30 minutes, Jim said. He turned to Doc, who had moved protectively closer during the exchange. "Rally the brothers. Full combat formation. Everyone armed." Doc nodded and stepped outside, his voice raising in a series of sharp commands that carried clearly through the open door. The Road brothers responded with military precision, motorcycles roaring to life, men moving with coordinated purpose. Jim guided Sarah to a chair, kneeling before her despite the protest of aged joints. "Sarah, listen to me. I need you to focus." He waited until her eyes met his. "I promise you, we will get Tommy back. But I need to know exactly what Davidson said. His exact words." Sarah struggled to control her breathing, to push back the panic threatening to overwhelm her. "The sheriff just said Davidson has him." "I don't know what he said." Jim looked to Sheriff Williams, who pulled a flip phone from his pocket. "He called me directly. Said to give you a message." The sheriff pressed a button, and Davidson's cultured voice filled the small cafe. "Sheriff Williams, by now you're aware I have the Martinez boy. A regrettable necessity, I assure you. Please inform Jim Carter that I'm prepared to exchange the child for the package his brother entrusted to him. He knows what I mean. We'll be at the old quarry north of town. 1 hour. Carter comes alone or the boy suffers the consequences. And Sheriff, any official response will result in immediate termination of negotiations. This is between Carter and me. Old business that needs resolving." The message ended. Jim stood, the decision already made in his eyes. "You can't go alone," Sarah pleaded. "They'll kill you both." "Davidson won't kill Tommy unless he has to," Jim said. "He knows he needs leverage until he has the package." "And after he has it?" Sarah asked. Jim didn't answer directly. "I've faced worse odds." He turned to Sheriff Williams. "Dave, gets Sarah somewhere safe. Keep your deputies on standby, but out of sight." "Already in motion," the sheriff confirmed. "Safe house is prepped." "I'm going with you," Sarah insisted, standing. "He's my son." Jim shook his head firmly. "That's exactly what Davidson expects. He'll use you against Tommy, and Tommy against you. The best thing you can do for your son right now is stay safe." Before Sarah could argue further, Mike Steele Williams entered the cafe, his massive presence filling the doorway. "We're ready," Mike said. 50 brothers armed and in formation. Just like old times. Jim nodded grimly. "With one difference. This time we know who the enemy is." He turned back to Sarah. "Trust me," he said, his voice gentler now. "I will bring him back." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty behind the words, steadied her. She nodded once, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. "The package," she remembered suddenly. "Don't you need it for the exchange?" A ghost of a smile touched Jim's lips. "Davidson thinks he knows what he wants. But some lessons take 30 years to learn." As Jim moved toward the door, Sarah caught his arm. "Jim, what aren't you telling me about Tommy, about my son?" Jim hesitated, his expression softening. "When this is over," he promised. "When Tommy is safe." Outside Main Street had transformed. The Road brothers had formed into tight, disciplined units, their motorcycles arranged in a defensive perimeter around the cafe. Despite their age, these men moved with the precision of soldiers, their bodies remembering rhythms established decades ago. Jim emerged from the cafe to a moment of absolute stillness. Then as one, the Road brothers raised their right fists in salute, an acknowledgement of leadership that transcended the years of separation. Mike approached leading Jim's restored shovelhead. He handed Jim a leather vest, the Road brothers' insignia prominent on the back with a single word patch below it. Ironheart. Thought you might want this back, Mike said. For old time's sake. Jim took the vest, feeling the weight of it, the history embedded in the leather. For a moment, he was 30 years younger, full of fire and certainty, a warrior among warriors. He slipped it on over his plain black t-shirt, the familiar embrace of the leather like a second skin. Never thought I'd wear this again, Jim said quietly. Mike's weathered face creased in a grim smile. Some things you never stop being, brother. No matter how many suits you wear or how many dresses you hem. He nodded toward the assembled brothers. These men followed you into hell once. They'll do it again without hesitation. Jim surveyed the gathering, recognizing faces aged by time but still bearing the unbreakable spirit that had bound them together through war and peace. He nodded once, accepting both the responsibility and the honor of their trust. Davidson wants a show, Jim said, his voice carrying to the assembled men. Let's give him one he'll never forget. Inside the cafe, Sarah watched through the window as Jim mounted the shovelhead. The engine roared to life, a sound like controlled thunder. With Jim in the lead, the Road brothers formed up in a perfect arrowhead formation, 50 motorcycles moving as one organism, a steel and chrome force, rolling out of Millbrook toward the northern quarry. Sheriff Williams gently guided Sarah away from the window. Come on, safe house is waiting. She turned to him, her face wet with tears, but her eyes suddenly sharp with determination. No, take me to my apartment first. There's something in Richard's box, something important. When the sheriff hesitated, she pressed, It might help Tommy, please. Against his better judgment, Williams nodded. 5 minutes. No more. The old limestone quarry sprawled across 50 acres north of Millbrook, abandoned decades ago when the operation became unprofitable. Nature had reclaimed parts of it, scrub brush and stunted trees growing from cracks in the stone, but the main pit remained a vast, unforgiving bowl of pale rock descending in terraced levels to a murky pool of rainwater 100 feet below. Davidson had chosen his ground well. The single access road wound down into the quarry, exposed and vulnerable. From his position on the highest terrace, he could see anyone approaching from miles away. Tommy Martinez sat on a folding chair, hands bound before him, a black serpent standing guard on either side. Despite the tears that had dried on his cheeks, the boy's posture remained defiant, his chin raised in a stubborn angle that reminded Davidson uncomfortably of another young man decades ago. Your mother must be worried sick, Davidson said conversationally, checking his platinum watch. Such a shame to put her through this distress, but necessary, I'm afraid. Tommy glared at him. Mr. Carter is going to make you sorry. Davidson smiled thinly. The tailor, I rather doubt that young man. One of the black serpents, a heavily tattooed man with a shaved head, approached. They're coming. Davidson raised his binoculars, focusing on the distant road. What he saw made his confident smile falter. Not one motorcycle, but dozens approaching in perfect formation. Leading them, a figure Davidson had hoped never to see again. Jim Carter, the Road brothers, vest unmistakable even at this distance. Ironheart rides again, Davidson muttered, lowering the binoculars. He turned to the tattooed man. Viper, spread your men along the upper terraces. No one fires unless I give the command. The black serpents took up positions, outnumbering the Road brothers nearly 2-1. Their newer motorcycles and weapons spoke of Davidson's generous backing, but they lacked the disciplined coordination of the older riders approaching. The sound reached them first, the synchronized rumble of 50 Harley-Davidson engines echoing off the quarry walls like approaching thunder. The Road brothers halted at the entrance to the quarry, maintaining their arrowhead formation. Only Jim continued forward, the shovelhead's distinctive growl amplified by the natural acoustics of the stone pit. He rode directly to the center of the lowest terrace, stopping 30 yards from where Davidson stood with Tommy. Killing the engine, Jim dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his age. He stood beside the motorcycle, making no move to approach further, his posture relaxed but ready. That's close enough, Carter, Davidson called, his cultured voice carrying across the distance. Let the boy go, Warren, Jim replied, his tone conversational, but pitched to Carrie. He has nothing to do with this. Davidson placed a manicured hand on Tommy's shoulder, the gesture simultaneously protective and threatening. On the contrary, he has everything to do with this, more than you know. Jim's expression remained impassive. I brought what you want. The package. Thomas's evidence against you. Show me, Davidson demanded. Jim reached slowly into his vest, producing a weathered envelope sealed with wax bearing the Road Brothers insignia. He held it up so Davidson could see it clearly. 30 years, Jim said. 30 years I've kept this safe, honored my promise to your brother. My brother was a fool, Davidson sneered. He never understood what was at stake. The bigger picture. The bigger picture, Jim's voice hardened. You sold out your own unit, your own brother, for money. Davidson waved a dismissive hand. Regrettable collateral damage in a much larger operation. Thomas was always too idealistic for his own good, like you. He tightened his grip on Tommy's shoulder. Now the package, slide it over. The boy first, Jim countered. Then the package. Davidson pretended to consider this. A partial good faith exchange, perhaps. Send the package halfway. I'll send the boy to meet it. When I confirm the contents are authentic, the boy continues to you. Jim nodded once. He knelt, placing the envelope on the ground, then used a small stone to slide it across the smooth quarry floor. It came to rest approximately halfway between them. Davidson nudged Tommy forward. Go on, boy, walk slowly. Stop at the envelope. Tommy stood, his bound hands making his movements awkward. He began walking toward the envelope, each step measured and careful on the uneven stone surface. His eyes remained fixed on Jim, hope and fear warring in his young face. When Tommy reached the envelope, he stopped as instructed. Davidson nodded to one of the black serpents, who moved forward to retrieve the package. The man picked it up, returning to Davidson and placing it in his outstretched hand. With calculated deliberation, Davidson broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. His triumphant expression faltered as he examined the contents. His face darkened with fury. Is this some kind of joke, Carter? He snarled, holding up blank papers. Where are the real documents? Jim's voice remained steady. Those stopped being important the moment you took the boy. This isn't about old evidence anymore, Warren. This is about Tommy. You're bluffing, Davidson said, though uncertainty had crept into his tone. Without the evidence, you have nothing. I have the truth, Jim replied, and so does Tommy. A new understanding dawned in Davidson's eyes, followed by cold calculation. He turned to the tattooed leader of the Black Serpents. Viper, kill the pie, then kill Carter. Viper raised his hands, signaling his men. 50 Black Serpents raised weapons in unison, taking aim at Tommy's small figure. But Tommy was no longer standing alone. In the seconds of Davidson's distraction, Jim had covered the distance between them with remarkable speed. He now stood beside the boy, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding the M1911 pointed directly at Davidson. It's over, Warren, Jim said quietly. You don't give the orders here. Davidson's laugh held no humor. Look around you, Carter. My men outnumber yours. The boy will die. You will die. All because you couldn't let the past rest. You're right about one thing, Jim acknowledged. I couldn't let the past rest. Not after what you did. Not just to Thomas, but to Tommy too. A look of genuine confusion crossed Davidson's face. What are you talking about? I never met this boy before today. Look at him, Warren, Jim said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Really look at him. Don't you see the resemblance to your brother, to Thomas? Davidson's gaze flickered to Tommy, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. The shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the determined expression. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by disbelief. Impossible, he breathed. Thomas died without children. Thomas died not knowing his girlfriend was pregnant, Jim corrected. She moved away from Millbrook after his death, married another man who gave Tommy his name. But Sarah always knew who Tommy's real father was. Tommy looked up at Jim, confusion written across his young face. Mr. Carter, what are you talking about? Jim squeezed the boy's shoulder gently. Your mom will explain everything, Tommy, I promise. Davidson struggled to regain his composure. It changes nothing. The boy means nothing to me, just another loose end to tie up. Like the loose end in Iraq, Jim asked. Your own brother. Thomas was weak, Davidson spat. He discovered my arrangement with certain interested parties and threatened to expose it. He became a liability. He was your brother, Jim said, disgust evident in his tone, and you arranged to have him killed. Business is business, Davidson said coldly. Family sentiment is a luxury I couldn't afford. Jim's expression hardened. And now you're back in business. But not just arms dealing this time. Something bigger. Something in Millbrook. That's why you've been buying up the town. A smile spread across Davidson's face, cold and reptilian. Very good, Carter. Always were smarter than you looked. He gestured expansively at the quarry. Millbrook sits on one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals in North America. Elements crucial for advanced technology military applications. Worth billions to the right buyers. And the Martinez Cafe, Jim pressed. Why so determined to get that particular property? Davidson's smile widened. The main vein runs directly beneath it. Sarah's fool of an ex-husband discovered it during his survey, tried to blackmail me, had to be dealt with. The pieces fell into place in Jim's mind. You didn't just force Richard to leave, you had him killed. As I said, loose ends. Davidson replied with a shrug. Now enough talking. Viper, finish this. The tattooed man raised his weapon, aiming at Jim's chest. Jim tensed, preparing to shield Tommy with his body, knowing the bullet would find him regardless. The shot, when it came, didn't come from Viper's gun. A single crack echoed across the quarry, and Viper collapsed a neat hole in his forehead. Before the Black Serpents could react, more shots rang out from the ridge above the quarry. Precision fire taking down the leadership of the Black Serpents with surgical accuracy. Davidson's face contorted with shock and rage. What is this? Jim allowed himself a small smile. You're not the only one who can plan ahead, Warren. Did you really think I came alone? Along the upper rim of the quarry, figures appeared. Road brothers positioned as snipers, covering every angle of the pit below. Among them, unmistakable in her determined stance, was Sarah Martinez, a hunting rifle raised to her shoulder. Davidson lunged forward, grabbing for Tommy, but Jim was faster. He tackled Davidson to the ground, the gun skittering away as the two men grappled on the hard stone surface. Despite Jim's age and Davidson's advantage in weight, decades of hard living had taken their toll on the businessman, while Jim's body remembered the disciplines of combat. With practiced efficiency, Jim pinned Davidson, one knee pressed into his chest, hands securing his arms. It's over, Warren. The sheriff has your confession on tape. The Road brothers have secured the Black Serpents. You've lost. Davidson's face twisted with hatred. You think this ends with me? The people I work for won't let this go. They'll come for you, for the boy, for everyone you care about. Let them come, Jim replied calmly. The Road brothers will be waiting. As if summoned by his words, the remaining Road brothers rode into the quarry surrounding the defeated Black Serpents. Mike dismounted, approaching Jim and Davidson with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew the battle was won. Just like Fallujah, Mike commented, looking down at Davidson with undisguised contempt. Only the rats were smaller. Sheriff Williams arrived with his deputies, moving to secure Davidson and the subdued Black Serpents. Sarah rushed down into the quarry, dropping the rifle to sweep Tommy into her arms, holding him as though she might never let go. Jim stood slowly, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind the aches and protests of a body that had given more than should have been asked of it. He watched as Sarah checked Tommy for injuries, her hands gentle, her eyes fierce with protective love. When she looked up at Jim, her expression held questions he knew he would have to answer. But not here. Not now. He nodded once, a promise for later, then turned to help Mike and the sheriff with the prisoners. Davidson, now handcuffed and being led to a patrol car, stopped beside Jim. This isn't the end, Carter. Men like me don't stay in prison. Jim leaned closer, his voice for Davidson's ears alone. If you ever come near that boy again, there won't be enough left of you to bury. That's not a threat. It's a promise from the Road brothers. Fear flickered in Davidson's eyes, quickly masked by defiance. But Jim had seen it, the recognition that some enemies are better left unprovoked. As Davidson was led away, Mike joined Jim, both men watching the departing patrol cars in silence. Just like old times, Mike said finally, though my back is going to regret that sniper position for a week. Jim smiled, a genuine expression that erased years from his weathered face. Getting old is a privilege not everyone gets, brother. Each ache is a reminder we're still here. Mike clapped a hand on Jim's shoulder. The question is, where is here for you now? You coming home to the club? Your patch is waiting. Jim looked across the quarry to where Sarah stood with Tommy, their silhouettes outlined against the afternoon sun. I think home might be closer than I realized. That evening, as the sun set over Millbrook, an unusual gathering took place at Sarah's cafe. The Road brothers, having helped secure the Black Serpents for transport to federal custody, had returned to town as heroes. The same townspeople who had regarded them with suspicion that morning now offered free meals, places to stay, and heartfelt gratitude. Sheriff Williams had released a statement confirming Warren Davidson's arrest on multiple charges, including kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, and the cold case murder of Richard Martinez. The FBI had been called in to investigate Davidson's connections to foreign entities interested in the rare earth minerals beneath Millbrook. At a corner table, Jim sat with Sarah and Tommy. The boy's earlier ordeal seemed all but forgotten as he excitedly recounted the day's events to his friends, his version growing more elaborate with each telling. You need to tell him, Jim said quietly to Sarah, watching Tommy demonstrate to his audience how Jim had thrown the knife in the cafe. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. I know. I always planned to when he was older, when he could understand. He's Thomas's son, Jim said. He deserves to know his father was a hero. And his uncle is a criminal, Sarah added bitterly. Jim's hand covered hers, stilling her nervous movement. His uncle made choices, bad ones. That has nothing to do with who Tommy is or who he'll become. Sarah looked up, her eyes searching Jim's face. You knew all along, didn't you? From the first time you saw him. That's why you've been so kind to us. Jim nodded slowly. He has Thomas's eyes, his spirit too. But I didn't stay because of my promise to Thomas. I stayed because Tommy and you became important to me. Family in a way I hadn't expected to find again. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. When I saw those men take him today, I thought I'd lost everything. But then I remembered what you said about the box Richard left behind, about what might be inside. Jim's expression grew curious. What did you find? Richard's original geological survey, maps showing exactly where the mineral deposits are. She smiled thinly. And his insurance policy, I suppose. Detailed notes about Davidson's plans, the offshore accounts, the foreign investors, everything the FBI needed. Smart man, Jim observed, though not smart enough to stay alive. He tried to do the right thing in the end, Sarah said softly. That counts for something. Their conversation paused as Tommy bounded over, his face flushed with excitement. Mom, can I go see the motorcycles? Doc says he'll show me the different models and how the engines work. Sarah exchanged a look with Jim, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Oh, hey, but stay where I can see you and don't touch anything without asking first. As Tommy raced off, Sarah turned back to Jim. What happens now? With the Road brothers, will you go with them when they leave? Jim considered the question, watching Mike and the others interacting with the townspeople, the initial wariness on both sides giving way to cautious friendship. The Road brothers will always be my family, Jim said slowly. But sometimes family doesn't mean living under the same roof. He met Sarah's eyes directly. I've found reasons to stay in Millbrook. If that's okay with you and Tommy. The smile that spread across Sarah's face was answer enough. Across the cafe, Mike watched the exchange with knowing eyes. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast when Jim glanced his way, an acknowledgement and a blessing combined. Outside, the motorcycles of the Road brothers gleamed in the fading light, chrome and steel sentinels standing guard over a town that had, in the space of a day, transformed from target to home. Among them, Jim's restored shovelhead held a place of honor, no longer hidden away like a shameful secret, but proudly displayed a bridge between past and present. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day in Maine. The Road brothers gathered on Main Street preparing to depart. Their work in Millbrook was done, though several had mentioned they might return for visits. The town had welcomed them in ways none had expected, offering a sense of belonging that had been rare in their nomadic lives. Jim stood before his tailor shop, dressed once again in his familiar work clothes, though the Road brothers' vest remained worn now with quiet pride rather than hidden shame. Tommy had positioned himself at Jim's side, watching the preparations with undisguised fascination. Can I come visit the clubhouse sometime? Tommy asked Mike, who had knelt to shake the boy's hand. Anytime, little man, Mike assured him. You've got Road Brothers protection for life. That makes you family. Sarah joined them carrying a box of sandwiches and thermoses of coffee for the rider's journey. It's not much, but Mike accepted the offering with a courtly nod. It's more than enough, ma'am. Your kindness won't be forgotten. As the Road Brothers mounted their motorcycles, Mike turned to Jim one last time. You sure about this, Ironheart? Your bike's tuned and ready. Your place at the table's always open. Jim glanced at Sarah and Tommy, then back to his oldest friend. Some roads lead us home in ways we never expected steal. My journey's brought me here. Mike nodded understanding in his weathered face. Keep the vest. Wear it proud. And if you ever need us, I know, Jim said simply. Brotherhood is forever. The two men embraced decades of shared history passing between them without words. Then Mike mounted his Electra glide, signaling the others with a raised fist. The Road Brothers departed as they had arrived in perfect formation, the thunder of their engines rolling through Millbrook like a farewell salute. Jim, Sarah, and Tommy watched until the last motorcycle disappeared around the bend, the sound fading into the distance. Will they come back? Tommy asked, his small hand finding Jim's larger one. Jim squeezed gently. Some will. Roads have a way of circling back to the places that matter. Sarah stepped closer, her shoulder brushing Jim's. And what about you? Any roads calling you away? Jim looked down at Tommy, then at the woman beside him, seeing in both the promise of something he had long ago stopped, believing was possible for men like him, a future unburdened by the past. No, he said, his voice certain. My road ends here. As they turned to walk back toward the cafe, Sheriff Williams approached, his expression troubled. Jim got a call from the FBI. Davidson escaped during transport, ambushed the convoy, 3 agents down. Jim felt Tommy's hand tighten in his. Any leads? The sheriff shook his head. Nothing solid, but there's more. Before he disappeared, Davidson made a call. Just one sentence, according to the agent who overheard it. Williams hesitated, glancing at Tommy. What did he say? Sarah asked, unconsciously moving closer to her son. Tell the Road Brothers this is just the beginning. Jim absorbed this, his expression giving nothing away. But inside, the warrior who had slumbered for 30 years stirred once more. Davidson would return, and when he did, Ironheart would be waiting. He looked down at Tommy's worried face and managed a reassuring smile. Don't worry, buddy. Remember what Mike said. You've got Road Brothers protection now. But they left, Tommy pointed out. Jim touched the vest. He wore the insignia of the Road Brothers, prominent over his heart. Not all of them. As they walked together toward the cafe, Jim scanned the horizon with the practiced eye of a man who had spent a lifetime watching for threats. Davidson was out there planning, waiting. But for the first time in 30 years, Jim Carter wasn't standing alone against the coming storm. He had found his road home, and he would defend it with everything he had. In the distance, a single motorcycle engine growled to life, a sentinel beginning its patrol of Millbrook's perimeter. Then another, and another. Jim smiled. Mike had left behind Guardian's Road Brothers, who understood that sometimes protecting your own meant staying behind when others rode on. What is it? Sarah asked, noting Jim's expression. Nothing, he replied, the weight of the M1911 concealed beneath his vest, a familiar comfort. Just the sound of the past making peace with the present. The old quarry stood empty, now the crime scene tape fluttering in the autumn breeze, the only evidence of the previous day's confrontation. But far below at the water's edge, a figure moved carefully among the rocks. Viper, the leader of the Black Serpents, had not died from the sniper's bullet, as everyone believed. The shot had grazed his skull, knocking him unconscious, but leaving him very much alive. Now battered and bloodied, he retrieved a waterproof satellite phone from its hiding place among the rocks. There was only one number programmed into it. He dialed with shaking fingers. When the call connected, he spoke just 4 words. Davidson escaped. Carter lives. The voice that responded was calm, cultured, and chillingly familiar, though not Davidson's. Understood. Maintain surveillance. Phase 2 will proceed as planned. Viper ended the call, looking up at the sheer quarry walls that surrounded him. Davidson had been merely a pawn, he knew. The true power behind the operation remained untouched, patient, and determined to secure the resources beneath Millbrook at any cost. The game wasn't over. It had barely begun. Across town, Jim Carter felt the autumn breeze shift, carrying with it the faint scent of approaching winter. Some instinct, honed through decades of survival, whispered that the danger had not passed. It had merely retreated, regrouping for the next assault. He tightened his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they walked, Tommy skipping ahead of them down the sidewalk. Whatever came next, he would be ready. The tailor had remembered how to be a warrior, and Ironheart of the Road Brothers had remembered what it meant to have something worth fighting for. 3 weeks passed in Millbrook with an uneasy quietness that reminded Jim Carter of combat zones between firefights. The townspeople resumed their routines with a new wariness, eyes lingering on strangers, conversations pausing when unfamiliar vehicles passed through. The confrontation at the quarry had shattered the town's innocence, leaving behind a heightened vigilance that Jim recognized all too well. The Road Brothers, who had remained behind, established a rotating presence, 3 or 4 riders at any given time patrolling the town's perimeter. Their weathered faces had become familiar sights at Sarah's cafe, where they drank coffee and exchanged stories with locals increasingly curious about the men behind the leather vests. Jim divided his time between his tailor shop and Sarah's cafe, one eye always on Tommy. The boy had processed the revelations about his parentage with remarkable resilience, peppering Jim with endless questions about Thomas Davidson, the father he had never known. Was he brave? Tommy asked one crisp October afternoon as Jim hemmed a pair of pants for Sheriff Williams. Jim set down his needle, giving the question the consideration it deserved. Yes, but not just in the way most people think of bravery. He stood up for what was right even when it was difficult, even when it cost him everything. Tommy absorbed this, his young face serious. Like you did at the quarry. Jim smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. I had a lot of help that day. From the Road Brothers, Tommy said with the certainty of a child who had found new heroes. And Mom, she was pretty brave with that rifle. Your mother, Jim agreed, is one of the bravest people I've ever known. Tommy watched as Jim resumed his stitching, the precise movements creating neat, invisible seams. Will you teach me how to sew? Mom says it's an important skill. Your mom is right, Jim said. Every man should know how to repair what's broken. It was in quiet moments like these that Jim allowed himself to believe a new life might be possible. The warrior could become the tailor again. The Road Brother could become simply Jim. But at night, when the town slept, he would walk the perimeter alongside his brothers, the M1911, a constant companion, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats. Davidson was still out there, and whatever power had orchestrated his escape remained unknown. On the surface, life in Millbrook continued its small-town rhythms. The FBI investigation into the rare earth minerals beneath the town proceeded with bureaucratic thoroughness. Geologists and government SUVs took samples from test sites throughout the area. Sarah's cafe thrived, the locals making a point of supporting the business that had become the unwitting center of Davidson's schemes. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, preparations were being made. Mike called regularly from the Road Brothers clubhouse in California, sharing intelligence gathered through the club's extensive network. Sightings of black serpents in neighboring states, rumors of Davidson meeting with foreign interests, whispers of a larger organization pulling strings behind the scenes. Jim listened and planned converting the apartment above his tailor shop into a command center of sorts. Maps of Millbrook and surrounding areas covered one wall. Duty rosters for the Road Brothers on rotation took up another. The third wall held photographs, Davidson-known black serpents, and a growing collection of unfamiliar faces captured by the Road Brothers during their patrols. Faces that had no reason to be in a small Maine town watching and waiting. Sarah visited the apartment one evening, stopping short at the threshold as she took in the transformation. You're expecting war, she said quietly. Jim didn't deny it. Better to prepare for a storm that never comes than be caught in the open when it hits. She moved to stand beside him, studying the faces on the wall. The FBI says Davidson has probably fled the country. The FBI, Jim replied, doesn't know Warren Davidson like I do. He doesn't retreat. He regroups. Sarah's hand found his fingers intertwining. The gesture had become familiar over the past weeks, comfort offered and accepted without need for words. Then we'll be ready, she said simply. Jim looked at her, this woman who had faced down kidnappers with a borrowed rifle to save her son, who had built a business from nothing after her husband's disappearance, who had raised a remarkable boy on her own. He saw in her eyes the same steady resolve he'd recognized in the best soldiers he'd served with. Yes, he agreed, we will. The storm, when it came, arrived not with thunder, but with whispers. It began with small things. The phone lines to the sheriff's office went down one night, followed by the cell tower on the edge of town the next. Internet service became spotty, then non-existent. Millbrook found itself increasingly isolated, cut off from outside communication, except for satellite phones brought in by the Road brothers. Sheriff Williams increased patrols, but his small force was stretched thin. The Road brothers filled the gaps, their military training evident in their disciplined coverage of Millbrook's vulnerable points. The locals, initially wary of the leather-clad bikers, now nodded in greeting as they passed, finding reassurance in their vigilant presence. Jim supervised it all with the calm efficiency of a commander who had seen worse conditions and survived. He established fallback points, evacuation routes, and emergency protocols that the townspeople embraced with surprising willingness. Fear, it seemed, was a powerful motivator for cooperation. "You've turned my tailors into a fortress," Mike observed during one of his satellite calls, a note of pride in his gruff voice. "Just applied what you taught me 30 years ago," Jim replied. "Control the ground, know the enemy, protect your people." "And who exactly are your people now?" "Ironheart," Mike asked, though the question held no judgment. Jim glanced out the window to where Sarah and Tommy were crossing the street, heading toward the cafe to prepare for the morning rush. "They always were my people, Steele. I just didn't know it yet." The call ended with Mike's promise to arrive within 24 hours with reinforcements. Whatever intelligence the Road brothers had gathered, it had convinced their president that Millbrook needed the club's full strength. Jim didn't argue. The prickling at the back of his neck, the combat instinct that had saved his life countless times, told him the waiting was nearly over. That night, Jim walked Sarah and Tommy home from the cafe, his vigilance heightened by the deepening darkness. The town's streetlights had been systematically failing for days, and the municipal repair crew couldn't find the source of the problem. "Can I sleep at your place tonight, Mr. Carter?" Tommy asked, his 8-year-old bravado not quite masking his unease with the growing shadows. "Not tonight, buddy," Jim replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "But I'll be right across the street if you need anything. And Doc is watching your building all night." Tommy nodded, visibly reassured by the mention of the Road brother, who had appointed himself the boy's unofficial guardian. "Doc says he was a real doctor in the Army. He showed me his medical kit. It has everything." "Doc was one of the best combat medics in Desert Storm," Jim confirmed. "Fixed me up more times than I can count." They reached Sarah's apartment, the building dark except for the security lights Jim had installed. He checked each room methodically before allowing Sarah and Tommy inside a ritual that had become standard over the past weeks. "All clear," he announced, holstering the M1911 beneath his Road brother's vest. "Lock up tight. Keep the satellite phone by your bed. Any problems, any at all, you call. I can be here in 30 seconds flat." Sarah nodded, her expression conveying both gratitude and something deeper that remained unspoken between them. "Be careful, Jim." He touched her cheek briefly, the gesture containing all the words neither of them were ready to say. "Always am." As Jim descended the stairs to the street, a figure emerged from the shadows. Doc, his weathered face alert beneath silver hair tied back in a neat ponytail. "All quiet," Jim asked. Doc nodded, his medic's bag slung over one shoulder, a shotgun carried discreetly at his side. "For now, but Jimmy's on perimeter patrol, reported movement in the woods north of town. Nothing definitive yet." "Increase patrols," Jim decided. 2-man teams, radio contact every 15 minutes. "Already done," Doc confirmed. "You trained us well, Ironheart." Jim clapped the older man's shoulder. "Get some coffee. I'll take first watch." From the window above, Sarah watched Jim disappear into the darkness, moving with the fluid economy of a man returning to his natural element. She had come to recognize the two sides of Jim Carter, the gentle tailor whose hands created beautiful garments with meticulous care, and the warrior whose eyes constantly assessed threats and exits. Both were equally real, equally true. Both were the man she had come to rely on, to trust. She cut the thought short, turning away from the window to help Tommy prepare for bed. This was no time for such reflections, not with Davison's threat hanging over them like a storm cloud ready to break. The attack, when it finally came, struck with precision and coordination that spoke of professional planning. It began at 3:17 in the morning. First, the town's backup generator exploded in a fireball visible for miles, plunging Millbrook into complete darkness. Seconds later, the sheriff's office was hit with an improvised explosive device that collapsed the front wall, trapping the 2 deputies on night duty beneath rubble. Jim was awake instantly, muscle memory from combat zones propelling him into action before conscious thought could catch up. He was fully dressed and armed in under 30 seconds, the satellite phone already at his ear as he descended to the street. "Mike," he said when the call connected. "It's starting. How far out are you, Tuan?" 2 hours, came the response. "Pushing the bikes as hard as we can. Hold the line, brother." "Always do," Jim replied, ending the call as gunfire erupted from the north end of town. The Road brothers on patrol had engaged the first wave of attackers. Jim could distinguish the deep boom of their shotguns from the lighter, faster reports of assault rifles carried by the invaders. Not black serpents, then. These were professionals. Military contractors most likely hired by whoever had engineered Davidson's escape. Jim crossed the street at a run, taking cover behind parked cars as he made his way to Sarah's building. Doc emerged from the shadows to join him, blood seeping from a cut above his eye. "Ambushed our northern patrol," Doc reported grimly. "Jimmy's down. Boyd's holding them off, but he's outnumbered." "Sarah and Tommy," Jim demanded. "Still inside. I was about to evacuate them to the fallback position." Jim nodded, his mind racing through contingencies. "Get them to the old mill. Use the tunnel we prepped. I'll cover the street." As Doc disappeared into the building, Jim assessed the situation with cold clarity. The attack was well coordinated, but focused primarily on the northern approach to town. The southern route remained open, at least for now. The Road brothers had established a defensive perimeter around the central block, but they were outnumbered at least 3-1. Jim's satellite phone vibrated. "Sheriff Williams." "Dave," Jim answered. "Status: 2 deputies trapped at the station." "I'm at the clinic with injured civilians." "These aren't just mercenaries, Jim. They're using military tactics, military-grade weapons." "I know," Jim replied grimly. "Get everyone you can to the old mill. We prepared it as a fallback. Use the access road through the Peterson farm." As he ended the call, Doc reappeared with Sarah and Tommy, both dressed in dark clothing. Tommy clutched his backpack, his young face pale but determined. Sarah carried the hunting rifle she'd used at the quarry, her expression grim. "Southern road is still clear," Jim told them. "Doc will get you to the mill. I need to help Boyd." Sarah gripped his arm. "Be careful, Jim. These aren't black serpents. They're shooting to kill." Jim nodded, allowing himself one moment to touch her face to memorize its contours, should this be the last time. "Get Tommy to safety. I'll find you." As Doc led Sarah and Tommy toward the southern edge of town, Jim moved in the opposite direction toward the sound of intensifying gunfire. He found Boyd, a former Marine sniper in his late 50s, pinned down behind an overturned pickup truck, methodically returning fire despite a bleeding wound in his shoulder. "Sit rep," Jim said, sliding into cover beside him. Boyd ejected a spent magazine from his rifle, slapping in a fresh one with practiced efficiency. "At least 15 hostiles, professional equipment, professional movements. They've got night vision, and they've got Jimmy." Jim processed this, his expression hardening. "Alive. Wounded, not dead. They're using him as bait. A standard tactic. Wound one fighter to draw out others, then ambush the rescue attempt." Jim had seen it before, had used it himself in another life. "We go together," he decided. "I'll draw fire, you extract Jimmy. Then we fall back to the old mill." Boyd nodded, checking his weapon. "Just like Mogadishu," he said with a grim smile. "Let's hope it ends better this time," Jim replied. They moved with the synchronized precision of men who had trained together for decades, though their last combat operation as a unit had been 30 years earlier. Jim provided covering fire while Boyd advanced in short bursts, using the darkness and parked vehicles for concealment. The mercenaries responded with disciplined volleys, their muzzle flashes revealing professional spacing and positioning. These were no street thugs or outlaw bikers. These were trained killers, the kind who work for shadowy organizations with unlimited resources. Boyd reached Jimmy's position, confirming with hand signals that the younger Road brother was alive, but seriously wounded. Jim increased his rate of fire, drawing the mercenaries' attention, while Boyd began dragging Jimmy toward the relative safety of an alleyway. They were halfway to cover when a new sound joined the cacophony of battle motorcycle engines. Dozens of them approaching from the south. Jim's heart sank. If the mercenaries had cut off the southern escape route, Sarah and Tommy might be heading into an ambush. He keyed his radio, attempting to warn Doc, but received only static in response. Communications were being jammed, but the motorcycles weren't heading toward the old mill. They were coming directly into town toward the battle. And as they drew closer, Jim recognized the distinctive growl of Harley-Davidson engines. The Road Brothers had arrived. They came like thunder, 50-plus motorcycles roaring down Main Street in attack formation. Mike led them standing on his pegs as he fired a shotgun, one-handed, his massive frame silhouetted against the muzzle flashes. Behind him, the full might of the Road Brothers Motorcycle Club advanced like an armored cavalry charge from an earlier century. The mercenaries caught between Jim's position and the advancing bikers momentarily faltered. It was all the advantage Jim needed. He sprinted to Boyd and Jimmy, helping to move the wounded man to the alley while the Road Brothers engaged the enemy. "Get him to the clinic," Jim ordered Boyd, "then to the mill. Mike and I will hold them here." Boyd nodded, securing Jimmy across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do, Ironheart." Jim managed a tight smile. "That doesn't leave much out." As Boyd disappeared with Jimmy, Jim moved to join Mike and the main force of Road Brothers, who had established a defensive line across Main Street. The mercenaries had fallen back to regroup, but Jim had no illusions about their retreat. They would return with reinforcements and a new strategy. Mike dismounted, embracing Jim briefly but fiercely. "Sorry we're late to the party," he growled. "Ran into some resistance about 20 miles out." "Black serpents?" Jim asked. Mike nodded grimly. "What was left of them? These new players have absorbed Davidson's old crew, using them as cannon fodder." Jim surveyed the Road Brothers, noting with professional appreciation their disciplined deployment despite the chaos of the night. "Casualties. 3 wounded, none critical. Your training protocols paid off." Mike studied Jim's face in the dim light. "Sarah and the boy, Doc's getting them to the old mill. Southern route." Mike's expression tightened. "Jim, we saw vehicles heading that way when we came in. Military type. Blacked out." Cold fear gripped Jim's chest. "How many?" "At least 3. Moving fast." Jim was already running toward his motorcycle before Mike finished speaking. The shovelhead roared to life beneath him, its familiar vibration a steady counterpoint to his racing heart. "Take half the brothers," Jim called to Mike. "Secure the town. I'm going after Sarah and Tommy." Mike nodded once, already issuing orders to the men nearest him. "We'll hold the line here. Go." Jim opened the throttle, the shovelhead responding with a surge of power that pressed him back against the seat. He took the southern route out of town, pushing the motorcycle to speeds it hadn't reached in decades. The machine performed flawlessly, as though it too understood the urgency of the mission. The old mill sat 3 miles south of Millbrook, a 19th century structure that had once been the town's economic center. Abandoned in the 1970s, it had been slowly reclaimed by nature, its massive stone walls still solid beneath encroaching ivy. The Road Brothers had spent weeks secretly reinforcing it, establishing defensive positions, stockpiling supplies, and creating multiple escape routes, including the tunnel that connected it to Sarah's building in town. As Jim approached, he cut the shovelhead's lights and engine, allowing momentum to carry him the final quarter mile in silence. He dismounted in the cover of trees, drawing the M1911 as he advanced on foot. The scene that greeted him confirmed his worst fears. 3 black SUVs were parked haphazardly before the mill's main entrance, their doors open. Bodies lay on the ground, mercenaries who had encountered the Road Brothers' booby traps in defensive positions. But the mill itself appeared to have been breached. Jim moved forward in a low crouch, using the SUVs for cover as he assessed the situation. Gunfire echoed sporadically from within the mill, suggesting resistance was still ongoing. Doc and the other Road Brothers were putting up a fight, but for how long? A familiar engine sound reached Jim's ears. Motorcycles approaching from the north. Reinforcements from Mike arriving just in time. Jim allowed himself a momentary relief before focusing again on the task at hand. The mill's main entrance was a kill zone, deliberately designed that way in their defensive planning. Jim chose instead a service entrance they had designated as a secondary access point, protected by a simple combination lock known only to the Road Brothers. Inside the mill was a shadowy maze of old machinery and improvised barriers. Jim navigated it from memory, moving toward the sounds of conflict with the silent efficiency of a predator. He encountered 2 mercenaries on the second level, dispatching them with hand-to-hand techniques before they could raise an alarm. Their equipment confirmed his earlier assessment: professional grade gear, military training. The main battle appeared to be centered around the mill's central chamber, a cavernous space where the primary machinery had once operated. The Road brothers had converted it into a defensible position with elevated platforms and interlocking fields of fire. Jim reached a vantage point on the upper level, taking in the situation below. Doc and three other Road brothers had established a perimeter around a group of townspeople, including children and elderly residents who had been evacuated from Millbrook. They were pinned down by mercenaries firing from multiple positions. Sarah was there using her hunting rifle with impressive precision, covering Doc as he tended to a wounded townsperson. But Tommy was nowhere in sight. Cold fear gripped Jim's chest. Had the boy been captured? Or worse, a movement in the shadows behind the mercenaries caught Jim's attention. A small figure darting between cover points, moving with purpose rather than panic. Tommy. The boy was using techniques Jim had taught him during their self-defense lessons, staying low, using cover, minimizing his profile. Pride mingled with terror as Jim watched Tommy work his way towards a control panel near the mill's emergency exit. The boy reached it, flipping switches in a specific sequence Jim recognized immediately. The emergency protocols they had established. Tommy was activating the final defensive measure. The old mill had been built beside a dam that controlled water flow to the town. The dam had been modernized over the years, but the original control mechanisms remained within the mill itself. By opening specific floodgates, the lower levels of the mill could be deliberately flooded, creating an evacuation opportunity through the upper exits while denying ground-level access. Jim checked his watch. 3 minutes until the floodgates opened. 3 minutes to get the townspeople to higher ground and ensure the mercenaries remained below. He keyed his radio, hoping the Road brothers' frequency was still operational. All brothers, this is Ironheart. Floodgates activating in 3 minutes. Move all civilians to upper exits. Repeat floodgates in 3 minutes. Doc's acknowledgement came through immediately, the old medic already organizing the evacuation. Jim watched as the Road brothers began moving townspeople toward the upper-level emergency exits, maintaining covering fire as they went. Sarah remained in position, still unaware of Tommy's actions or location. Jim needed to reach her before the waters came. He descended rapidly, using service ladders to drop between levels. 2 mercenaries spotted him, but Jim's reaction time hadn't dulled with age. Both men went down before they could bring their weapons to bear. Jim reached the main floor, moving in a combat crouch toward Sarah's position. A mercenary rounded a corner directly in front of him, raising his weapon. Jim's M1911 spoke once, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. The mercenary collapsed. The shot drew Sarah's attention. Her eyes widened as she spotted Jim, relief and fear warring in her expression. He reached her, pulling her into cover as the bullets impacted where she had been seconds before. "Tommy," she gasped, clutching his arm. "They took Tommy." "No," Jim assured her, gesturing toward where the boy was now making his way back from the control panel. "He's safe, but we need to move now. This level's about to flood." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. "The dam controls. That's why you chose the mill." Jim nodded, impressed despite the dire circumstances by her quick grasp of the situation. "Tommy just activated them. We have less than 2 minutes to reach higher ground." As if on cue, a low rumbling began beneath their feet, the first indication that the floodgates were opening. The mercenaries paused in their assault, confusion evident in their hesitation. Jim signaled to Tommy, who immediately began moving toward them, staying in cover as he'd been taught. The boy had almost reached them when a figure stepped out from behind a massive gear assembly, grabbing Tommy by the collar and hauling him upright. Warren Davidson. He looked different from when Jim had last seen him at the quarry. Thinner, more haggard, his expensive suit replaced by tactical gear, similar to what his mercenaries wore. But his eyes burned with the same cold calculation, the same ruthless intelligence. Carter Davidson called, pressing a pistol to Tommy's temple. "Call off your boss and stop the flooding, or your precious legacy ends here." Jim raised his hands slowly, the M1911 pointed skyward in a non-threatening position. "Let the boy go, Warren. Your quarrel is with me." Davidson's laugh held no humor. "My quarrel is with anyone who stands between me and what's mine. The minerals beneath this town are worth billions. Did you really think I'd walk away from that because of one setback?" "Those minerals don't belong to you," Jim replied, edging forward incrementally. "They belong to Millbrook, to its people." "Its people," Davidson sneered. "Backwards small town nobodies who don't have the vision to see what's possible, what's necessary." Necessary for what? Jim asked, buying time as he assessed angles and distances. Tommy's eyes were locked on his, the boy's terror evident but contained, waiting for Jim's signal. Davidson's expression shifted, something like zealotry replacing the cold calculation. Do you have any idea what these minerals are used for? Advanced weapon systems, quantum computing, the future of warfare, and intelligence. Whoever controls these resources controls the next century. And who controls you, Warren? Jim pressed. You're not calling the shots here. You never were. Anger flashed across Davidson's face. I am a visionary, a patriot ensuring American dominance in a changing world. You're a traitor who got his own brother killed for profit, Jim countered. Thomas saw through you 30 years ago. Now Tommy will too. The mention of his brother's name triggered something in Davidson. His grip on Tommy tightened the pistol, pressing harder against the boy's head. Thomas was weak, sentimental, just like you. The rumbling beneath their feet intensified. Water began seeping onto the mill floor, first a trickle, then a stream, quickly becoming a flood. The mercenaries were retreating to higher ground, some already abandoning the fight entirely as the waters rose. Jim locked eyes with Tommy, a silent communication passing between them. The boy gave an almost imperceptible nod. You're right about one thing, Warren, Jim said. Thomas was sentimental. Fortunately, his son isn't. Tommy moved with a quickness that caught Davidson by surprise, ducking and twisting out of the man's grip, using a technique Jim had taught him. As Davidson struggled to regain control, Jim's M1911 came up in a smooth arc. The shot echoed through the mill, drowning out even the roar of the incoming water. Davidson staggered backward, the pistol falling from nerveless fingers as he clutched his chest. His expression held more surprise than pain, as though he couldn't quite believe what had happened. You shot me, he said, voice faint with disbelief. You actually shot me. Jim moved forward, keeping his weapon trained on Davidson as the waters swirled around their ankles. For Thomas, for what you did to him, for what you tried to do to his son. Davidson sank to his knees, the water now reaching his waist as he slumped against the support column. You don't understand, he gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. I'm not the end of this. I'm just the beginning. They'll send others. They won't stop until they have what they want. Let them come, Jim replied, gathering Tommy into his side with his free arm. Millbrook will be waiting. Davidson's eyes locked onto Tommy's face, something like recognition flickering in their dying light. You have his eyes, he whispered, Thomas's eyes. Then Warren Davidson, businessman, trader, and architect of his own brother's death, slipped beneath the rising waters, carried away by the flood he had helped create through his relentless greed. Jim didn't waste time watching him go. The water was rising rapidly now, already chest-deep on Tommy. Jim lifted the boy onto his shoulders, fighting against the current as he made his way towards Sarah, who was climbing to higher ground. Mom, Tommy called, reaching for her as they drew near. Sarah pulled her son into her arms, holding him with desperate strength, her eyes meeting Jim's over Tommy's head. Thank you, she mouthed, words inadequate for what had transpired, but all that was possible in the moment. The three of them climbed to the upper level, joining the townspeople and road brothers, gathered on the emergency exit platform. Doc was there, tending to the wounded, his medic's bag somehow still intact despite the chaos. Davidson, the old medic asked, meeting Jim's eyes. Gone, Jim replied simply. Doc nodded, understanding all that wasn't said. The others are pulling out. Without their paymaster, the mercenaries have lost their appetite for the fight. Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines confirmed his words. The road brothers who had remained in town were arriving, having driven off the remaining attackers. Mike led them, dismounting with the weary satisfaction of a commander whose plans had succeeded despite heavy opposition. Town's secure, he reported to Jim. The rest of them bugged out when they realized they were fighting the entire club. Cowards, he added with professional disgust. Jim nodded, surveying the gathered townspeople. Despite injuries and shock, they had weathered the assault with remarkable resilience. Sheriff Williams moved among them, offering reassurance and organizing care for the wounded. The community had bent, but not broken. As dawn broke over the old mill, painting the stone walls with golden light, Jim found himself standing apart, watching as the adrenaline of combat gave way to the quieter aftermath of survival. Sarah approached Tommy, asleep in her arms despite the noise and activity around them. He finally crashed, she said, nodding toward her son. After all this, it was the quiet that did it. Jim smiled gently, brushing hair from the boy's forehead. He's going to be okay. Kids are resilient, and he's got his mother's strength. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but clear with purpose. And his father's courage. Both of them. Jim understood her meaning, humbled by the comparison to Thomas. I'm not trying to replace him, he said quietly. I know, she replied. But Tommy needs a father, and I... She hesitated, then continued with newfound certainty. I need you, Jim Carter, not just as a protector or a friend, as something more. Before Jim could respond, Mike approached, his expression serious despite their victory. Jim, we need to talk. The intel we gathered from the mercenaries. This goes deeper than Davidson. Jim nodded, the warrior in him already processing the implications. Foreign interests? Domestic, Mike corrected grimly. High level. Government connections. This isn't over. It never is, Jim acknowledged. He looked at Sarah and Tommy, then back to Mike. But for now, Millbrook is safe, and that's enough for today. As the sun rose higher, the Road brothers began the work of recovery. Motorcycles ferried supplies and medical equipment. Teams cleared debris from the streets of Millbrook. The wounded were tended, the dead respectfully covered. Through it all, Jim Carter moved with the quiet authority that had earned him the name Ironheart decades before. But now that heart beat for something beyond the Brotherhood of the Road. It beat for a woman whose courage matched his own. For a boy who carried the legacy of a fallen brother. For a town that had given him sanctuary when he needed it most. The tailor had remembered how to be a warrior. Now the warrior would learn to be something else entirely. A partner, a father, a guardian not just of a code or a brotherhood, but of a future. 3 months later, Millbrook had largely recovered from what locals now called the siege. The town had buried its dead, rebuilt its damaged structures, and established a new normal that included the continued presence of several Road brothers who had chosen to settle permanently. The federal government had declared the rare earth mineral deposits a matter of national security, establishing a legitimate mining operation that would benefit the town through jobs and infrastructure while ensuring the resources served national rather than private interests. Jim's tailor shop had reopened, though his workload had decreased as he took on new responsibilities. The Road brothers had established a Millbrook chapter with Jim serving as president, despite his protestations that he was too old for the role. Mike had simply laughed, pointing out that leadership came from experience, not age. Sarah's Cafe thrived, becoming the unofficial headquarters for both the Road brothers and the townspeople who had developed an unexpected kinship with the aging bikers who had defended them. On a crisp winter morning with snow falling gently outside, Jim stood in his shop, adjusting the final details on a small leather vest. The Road brothers' insignia was embroidered on the back, along with a new patch that read Prospect. Is it done? Tommy asked, practically bouncing with excitement as he entered the shop after school. Can I try it on? Jim smiled, holding up the vest. Just finished the stitching, custom made for the youngest prospect in Road brothers' history. Tommy slipped it on, the pride in his expression, making him seem older than his 8 years. It's perfect. Wait till Doc sees it. Just remember what I told you, Jim cautioned, kneeling to adjust the vest's fit. Being a Road brother isn't about the patch or the motorcycle. It's about honor, loyalty, protecting those who can't protect themselves. Tommy nodded solemnly. Like you did for Mom and me. Like we all did for each other, Jim corrected gently. The shop door opened, admitting Sarah with a rush of cold air and snowflakes. She paused at the sight of Tommy and his new vest, emotion passing briefly across her face before resolving into acceptance. Very handsome, she said, adjusting the collar with motherly precision. A proper Road brother in training. Tommy beamed, then spotted Mike through the window, working on his motorcycle despite the snow. Can I go show Uncle Mike? He asked eagerly. Sarah nodded and Tommy darted out, leaving her alone with Jim in the quiet shop. She moved closer, fitting herself naturally into the circle of his arms. I never thought I'd be raising a future biker, she murmured, watching through the window as Mike showed Tommy some detail of the motorcycle's engine. He'll be whatever he chooses to be, Jim replied. The Brotherhood is just teaching him values along the way. Sarah turned in his arms, studying his face with the directness that had first drawn him to her. And what about you, Jim Carter, Tailor Warrior Road brother? Which is the real you? Jim considered the question, looking past her to the town he had defended, to the people who had become his family, to the life he had never expected to find. All of them, he said simply, and something more, I hope. She smiled, understanding his meaning. Something more, she agreed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Outside, the Road brothers went about their day, gray-haired men finding renewed purpose in a town that had accepted them. Mike watched as Tommy ran from one to another, proudly showing off his prospect vest. The boys' laughter carried through the snowy air, a sound of hope and continuity that transcended the hardships of the past. In his shop, Jim Carter held the woman he loved and looked toward a future he had once thought impossible. The road had been long and often dark, but it had led him home. To Millbrook, to Sarah and Tommy, to the brotherhood that had always been his anchor. And if threats emerged again, as Davidson had promised they would, Jim would be ready. Ironheart of the Road brothers would stand alongside his brothers, defending what was his. Not just a code or a patch, but a family, a community, a legacy worth fighting for. The road to redemption had been long, but the journey had only just begun.